Okay, folks, we are ready to reconvene at about 1:30, public meeting number 137, and we will pick up again with Director Mark Vanderlinden on research and problem gaming. Before we do that, we've thought again about and talked with Mark about the timing of the comment period on the report that we just entertained before lunch, and agree that it would be better to give a couple of weeks. So we'll have a 2-week comment period, and then Mark's recommendation will be at soonest 2 weeks after that. So again, if you could get that word out, Hank, that it's a 2-week comment period rather than one. It's an important enough issue. We want to make sure everybody has a chance to be heard. Okay, item 5B is draft credit checks, ATM and bank card regs. Attorney Grossman and Mr. Vanderlinden.
Okay, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Okay, so as you said, we're bringing back before you the credit regs that would include the acceptance for checks, procedures for establishing patron credit accounts, patron requests for suspension of credit privileges, and automatic teller machines. And while this, we're putting this under the problem gambling agenda items, I think that that's absolutely accurate because it's reflected, what's reflected in the responsible gaming framework is also reflected in the document that's before you now. But it also includes, obviously, a number of other items that would address this issue. The feedback that we got for this even thus far would come for the framework would come from some of our licensees through the Massachusetts Partnership for Responsible Gaming. We also received comments from the AG's office and have had a couple meetings with them. And so with that, would you like to, we can talk about some of the key points of it. We could also just open it up for discussion if you have any pointed questions.
I'm open to suggestions. From my standpoint, it would be helpful. I haven't had a chance to read it closely, but it would be interesting to know what you all think are the highlights, and particularly what you think are controversial at this point.
Okay.
But any other suggestions on that?
That
right?
makes sense.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'll just walk you through what we believe some of the highlights to be. Of course, we can pause at any point for a deeper dive. Ultimately, though, I think it's important to consider the context that these appear in. We've separated these out from the internal control regulations, but ultimately it's envisioned that these will be part of the internal controls in the filing. We separated them out given the heightened attention they've received over the course of the past year or so. But ultimately, we would hope to merge them back together as we move forward with the internal controls, which you'll hear a little bit more about later. That being said, we've broken what we've colloquially referred to as the credit regulations out into a number of different sections. There's a general section that provides an overview of how checks and cash equivalents will be accepted and presented by patrons, and how what are referred to as counter checks or markers, we don't use the term marker, but that's what they're colloquially referred to as, are processed and what the procedure for that is. And we require that the gaming licensee establish processes and procedures for all of those things in a general sense. I thought I would just note at this point, though, that the statute, it's section 27F, requires that the Commission collaborate with the Department of Transitional Assistance, Labor and Workforce Development, and Housing and Community Development, and a number of areas that are relevant here. So this, depending upon where we go from here today, will be the time where we'll probably want to initiate some contact with those agencies to get their input here, as there are a number of provisions in here that by statute we're obliged to coordinate with those other entities on, such as the cashing of government-issued checks and things of that nature, ensuring that EBT cards can't be used in the casino. all of those areas, the statute says we work with the other agencies to collaborate to ensure that there are good regulations in place to prevent some of those things from happening. We talk about, on page 2, for example, a section on the redemption, substitution, and consolidation of counter checks. So we start with the issuance of counter checks, then we move to how you go about redeeming them, substituting them, or consolidating them in the event that you have more than one outstanding. We require here that the gaming licensee, again, come up with a process and protocol for all of those things happening. In here, they're fairly general. We don't get into a lot of particulars about how that needs to be done. And a lot of these, that issue will kind of meld into our later conversation about the internal controls in the discussion about how prescriptive we want to be when it comes to these types of areas. Do we want to prescribe exactly how you go about redeeming a check, or do we want to say to the gaming licensee that you need a procedure relative to redeeming checks? And it's finding a comfortable place that we're going to need to get to. As we move on to section 42, bottom of page 2, top of page 3, we get into the acceptance of payments on outstanding counter checks and how coming up with a policy and procedure for doing that.
Can I go back to a previous section, Todd, as it seems like you're going to walk us through a few of these. What's the thought behind debit card cash transactions being precluded?
Yes, no, I'm glad you brought us back to that. I scrolled a little too far. So this is what Commissioner Zuniga is referencing is on the top of page 2. It's paragraph 10. This is one of the general provisions we have included in the standard policy and procedures for the issuance of counter checks. And this derives from the problem gambling framework. This was one of the provisions that the Commission looked at in a general sense, and this represents the regulatory form of something you looked at in the framework. It's highlighted here so that you could get a close look at it and understand exactly how it fits into the regulatory structure. And what this does is that it would preclude the acceptance of either credit cards or debit cards, essentially at the cage on the in the gaming area. And it would require the gaming licensee to come up with processes and protocols to ensure that they are precluded. So
They are what?
Precluded. They can't be used.
At the cage?
At the cage. Well, anywhere in the gaming area, but it's at the cage effectively that we're talking about. So that's what it would look like, and that's what the effect of your review of the problem gambling framework looks like.
Well, then, I guess I didn't fully understand that, because 9 says, why doesn't 10 swallow up 9?
9 has to do with automatic teller machines,
Right.
which can be located within 15 feet of the casino floor, so it's not on the gaming floor itself.
But 10 says you can't have a credit card transaction,
A debit card.
In the gaming
Gaming
area.
area.
credit card, 10 says a credit card cash transaction or a debit card cash transaction anywhere in the place, right?
No, it says gaming area. Gaming area is that actually encompass the casino, cage and stuff. Non-gaming area is where you would go, hotel, restaurants, that kind of.
But still the gaming establishment.
Yeah, but if
I
all
think
right,
10.
I don't need to stop us now. I may want to talk about that further.
Okay. We may need to clarify 9, that applies to the whole gaming establishment, 10 just to the gaming area, but
Right.
that was the intent anyway.
But under 10,
Oh, I see what the.
It's only EBTs.
I see what it is. Okay, thank you.
but under 10, a patron could presumably pay a meal or the bar, the tab, in the gaming area with their credit card, right?
Yes.
Because it's a credit card cash transaction, cash advance that's precluded, not the use of credit cards altogether.
Excuse me, sorry.
Well, I mean, that's something we would need to clarify. I mean, the way this is written, you couldn't use a credit card in the gaming area.
And that's,
Oh, it's a cash transaction.
But what does credit card cash transaction mean?
We define that term actually in a different section. I can pull
I-
that up.
I actually thought it meant,
Take cash.
yeah, only take cash advances.
You get a burger, but not cash.
Yeah.
Right.
You can pay, right,
Right.
exactly.
Isn't that's accurate?
That's the intention.
That sounds.
You don't want to get
sounds
$500
Sounds good.
out of your cash advance off your credit card in the gaming area.
The intention is, a patron cannot use their credit card in the gaming area to get cash, but they can use their credit card to pay for a burger or
Yes.
a drink.
Yeah, I mean, in a general sense, there's nothing that's intended to preclude using your credit card for any non-gaming type things.
Right.
I think that's the intent.
That's accurate to me.
I think one of the more interesting places where we have a lot of good language is on page 4. It's the establishment of the patron credit account and the standards and some of the considerations that go into that determination are listed here in paragraphs A through G. The first two, essentially A and B, set out the standard, if you will, and they talk about creditworthiness and ensuring that credit is not extended to an individual in an amount beyond that which the information reviewed demonstrates they have a reasonable ability to pay. So we set up essentially a standard for the licensees to apply when issuing credit. And it may be that this is essentially the standard that's used generally, though we weren't able to find it written in this way in other jurisdictions, but we thought it would be helpful to have some actual language here in these regulations. Paragraph C, or Section C, is also a provision that was migrated over from the responsible gaming, or problem gambling.
Responsible gaming.
Right, framework. And that is that credit will only be extended to patrons who qualify for a minimum threshold of $10,000 and will not exceed the amount requested by the patron. So that's an important provision as well. It doesn't mean that someone has to take $10,000, just that they have to be deemed qualified to receive $10,000 to ensure that the lower amounts, or people who would only qualify for lesser amounts, wouldn't be extended credit, of course. So that's an
So
important.
where did this $10,000 come from? I understand the concept. How did we get the number?
It was an issue that was discussed during the Partnership for Responsible Gaming. It was a recommendation that came from that group.
So that's something the operators
Yes.
support?
Oh, all right, good.
Okay.
This is an opportunity to just see if I understand a premise underlying all of these check things correctly. In this world, as I understand it, checks are often used as security for
House credit.
for house credit, right? Normally you give a check to somebody and you anticipate the check will be cashed and in return you'll get something from it. Here in this world, as I understand it, the check often is a means of establishing, getting some house credit. So you give a check for $10,000 and you get $5,000 or $3,000 in cash, and they hold the check until you pay the $3,000 back.
Most of the time, if you put a check for 10,000 down, that would be considered a cash deposit in these regs, and you can draw right on that deposit out of the cage from a table or whatever.
But the check would not necessarily be cashed right at that
No, at
time.
the end of the day, you would have the right to redeem that if you wanted. It could eventually be deposited.
No, I understand that.
But, you know, you have the opportunity to redeem the check if you have the funds to do so.
And do these regulations say how long the operator must hold the check?
They have to have a policy, but it cannot be longer than 30 days.
Right, so they could hold it for 30 days and
Yes.
give you 30 days to redeem it.
Yes.
Right.
A question, because you're talking about item C, credit will only be extended to the patrons who qualify for a minimum threshold of $10,000. Are we talking within a specific time period, or is it that one-time request for the minimum threshold?
That would be
Is
when they
this on a daily
initially
basis?
set up credit. It
I'm
would be
sorry.
based on that. They would check to see if they actually qualified for that amount.
Okay,
And you might only ask for 3,000 in credit, but you would have to qualify for that $10,000 threshold.
okay. But the timeline in terms of, that's my one-shot deal, or that's on
No,
a
it-
weekly
it would
basis,
be
monthly basis?
As long as you have credit there,
Okay.
or ask for an increase or, decrease or whatever.
Okay.
Would the, just to pick up on that, would this house credit against a $10,000 check, or against a $10,000 check?
It's
Be
not really
covered
house
by-
credit. What you're doing is drawing on that deposit that you put in there. At the end, you can buy that check back if you have sufficient funds to do so. So you're not really drawing on credit if you put a cash check in.
I see. That's not considered a credit transaction, it's considered a cash
It's a cash
transaction.
deposit.
I got you, okay.
The term credit, it seems, as someone who's somewhat new to this, is somewhat of a misnomer. This is not really
Right.
credit per se,
Right.
as we
Right.
all understand it. It's
Right.
really, you have cash there
Right.
that they let you use.
Are there standards that determine creditworthiness or who has the ability to get credit up to 10,000, or is that part of what we would be reviewing? Where do those standards come from?
Well, that comes down a little further on, and we talk about what has to go into the creation of a credit file, and this starts on page 5.
Yeah.
We go into some of the sources of information that the gaming licensee has to use, and then they have to verify certain information, and we go into a little bit about how they have to go into verifying certain pieces of information. So essentially, they have to create a whole credit file on an individual in which they're able to document why they did decide to extend credit to an individual and in what amount. There's also a provision that talks about derogatory information, which we actually define in the internal controls regulations as essentially things like bounce checks and other types of that thing. And then, so that if they decide to issue credit to someone who has derogatory information, that they explain why they did it. Perhaps someone bounced the check by mistake, so it wasn't, a big deal. They cleared it up shortly thereafter. Whatever it is. So the regs do require that a process and an infrastructure be put in place to address the gathering of certain information, a thoughtful decision as to whether to issue credit, and then how it goes, how they go about paying it off, and then we get into a little further down how the gaming licensee would go about collecting a debt if in the event that the check bounces, essentially.
Good.
I'm sorry, can I go back to page 4, letter F? The credit application will include a problem gambling self-assessment. Who's coming up with that self-assessment?
There's a standard assessment that I would recommend called the BBGS, Brief Biopsychosocial Assessment. It's a 3-question assessment that's been widely accepted, tested, evaluated.
Okay, and it's more of a, once again, right before you sign that credit application, ask yourself these questions. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't involve necessarily the licensee's
No.
staff. Okay, so if we're going to be, I would think we'd want to be more prescriptive than a problem gambling self-assessment. If we've identified what it is,
Okay.
put it in.
Sure. We can, I think we can add that easily. Yeah.
Along those lines, we have added some language in here about certain disclosures that have to be made as part of the credit application. Those are on the top of page 6. So, Mr. Chair, just to pick up on some part of your question, the credit file and the information looked at looks at such things as the individual's residence, current casino credit limits, outstanding balances, outstanding indebtedness, and personal checking account information, verification of all of those items. We talk about the implementation of a process by which credit will be approved, who's going to approve it, what type of sign-offs do you need. And the same as there are parallel requirements that they put in place, provisions for the increase in one's credit line, and how often that can be done. On the bottom of page 13, we get into data collection, essentially. We say they have to keep a log of all the counter checks and slot counter checks that they have outstanding. We get into, on the bottom of page 15, the suspension of one's credit privileges. This is a voluntary process, similar to the process by which one would exclude themselves from the casino altogether. We allow we require a process be put in place where one could exclude themselves from receiving credit or having their account shut down. And corollary is that there are procedures in place as to how they could reestablish their account once they decide they want to open it back up.
So this is similar to the self-exclusion in that it could be tiered. I could sign up for a 1 year, for a 3 year.
This is not quite as detailed as that. This is more basic, and we just say that we certainly could go down that road.
There are not set prescribed times that, or a menu of time spans that somebody could choose from. It's more general than that.
That's fine. That's good.
I think we say
Why not? I mean, why you've got self-exclusion that has time, why is there no time associated with the credit exclusion?
I didn't see any precedent for that in any other jurisdiction, and so.
That never held you back before.
Touche. That's a really great point, Mr. Chairman. No, we could certainly use the
seems
same
logical.
time frames.
Just for the same reason that a self-exclusion does have time associated with it, it seems kind of odd to not have it. It seems like very much the same principle. You're trying to support people who know they've got a problem and are volunteering for help. Why would you have time associated with one and not the other? It just doesn't make sense. Okay. So you'll look at that.
I certainly will.
And just to pick up on something we talked about before, it was bottom of page, top of page 18, we get into the procedure for depositing of checks, consolidation and redeeming of checks, some of the particulars there, the correction of any mistakes, that go into, that are recorded on some of these counter checks. The bottom of page 19 gets into the debt collection practices. We cross-reference the Attorney General's debt collection regulations and say that essentially those have to be followed. We add in here, the top of page 20, we say that a gaming licensee's debt collection policy shall not allow for placement of a lien on a patron's primary residence. That was an issue that came up a while back, so we explicitly mentioned that. And then the last provision we have on page 22 deals with ATMs. We essentially cross-reference the Division of Banks statutes and regulations and make clear that those have to be followed. And then again, incorporate one of the provisions that was found in the problem gambling, responsible gaming framework that says that ATMs shall not be located closer than 15 feet from the gaming area in a gaming establishment. No ATM should be located 15 feet. So that is a kind of a broad overview of what we have in here.
Excuse me, Todd, and Division of Banks is okay with that standard?
That issue is still somewhat outstanding as to whether ATMs will be allowed in gaming establishments at all. You'll recall there's an issue in there. There's a provision in the banking statute that talks about the location of what they refer to as electronic branches, which include ATMs, in places where legalized gambling occurs. That provision was placed in the law 20 years ago or so. And we're still working to determine how that will be interpreted. So this would be kind of a subset of that. I mean, there is still a chance that one could interpret the banking statutes to preclude ATMs altogether, but assuming that's not the approach that's taken, this would fit neatly in there. To answer your question directly, though, they haven't signed off on
Okay.
this.
And they won't think we've assumed it by,
No, they're aware.
you're in touch with them?
I
okay.
have mentioned that this
Okay.
is something that was in the framework.
And where did the 15 feet come from?
It was originally 100 feet, and having seen some of Penn's plans, that would have us out in the parking lot someplace, being 100 feet away. So I thought to be reasonable to give them some space where they would be able to have an ATM if they wanted off their floor.
It was also an issue that was discussed in the MPRG, Mass Partnership meetings, and I think specifically we discussed 100 feet. We discussed that would, exactly as Bruce had said, would not facilitate, not be reasonable. And we came up with 15 feet. The idea is that it's not in the gaming area, that it's off, that it allows somebody to actually have to get up to go to think about whether or not they're going to access more cash for gambling purposes.
Right. Okay. You're fine with that? I am. Okay. Any other questions, comments? All right. Thanks very much. Now, so where are we in the process? What happens next with these regs?
Well, I think we might be able to gain some clarity after we talk about the internal control regs, which are coming up at some point in the not too distant future. So we can talk about everything together and whether you'd like to move different pieces at different times, or if you want to do the whole thing together. As I mentioned, this is part of the internal controls. So if you elect to move the internal control document, which you have before you ahead today, for example, this would be done separately, and I suppose, in keeping with past practice, you'd want to allow a period of informal comment on these credit regs before we start moving them through the formal process. In which case, we would just move these separately from the remainder of the internal control regulations. Or if you were to hold off on the rest of the internal controls, we could move everything together.
Is there an urgency?
I mean, we're just starting today. We got our first comments on the internal controls, and there's, I understand, Group 1 possibly coming to comment on it. It would probably be beneficial for us to look at those comments prior to moving it, ahead.
Is there anything, is it purely procedures? I'm thinking about Penn. If it's 3 weeks, if we wait a couple of weeks, we're into likely into January before we finalize the internal control and these regulations.
They have been working on the draft to implement it into their system. I think if we had it by the end of January, that would not be a big problem for them. I've been in constant communication with
Come on up, Lance.
Rick Day and I discussed this topic yesterday. Bruce is correct. Rick asked me that question yesterday from our regulatory folks. In a perfect world, 12/31, drop dead date of 1/31 for us. So the end of January works.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think part of the process here is and I think Bruce kind of mentioned it, is the credit sections make sense to go ahead and put it up for informal public comment, because otherwise it sort of get lost in the huge product of the internal controls themselves.
Yeah, for the reason that you pulled them out to begin with, I think that does make sense. Thank you, Lance.
Right.
Can I make one quick comment? On page 16, we write that the commission shall maintain a list of the credit. This is probably a little ideology, but I prefer every time that we write something that the commission will do to be that a may. We will do it, but I don't want to write a shall in regulations. I mean, of course, we'll maintain it, but
Similar to the self-exclusion, the casino self-exclusion list, I would want to go back and make sure we could see
It's not
that
a statute.
the language is consistent between those, because we are responsible for maintaining that master list. It should look similar to the credit suspension.
and I should have mentioned, unless it's a specific direction in the statute. If it is, of course, a shall fits just fine. But if it in deference to the statute, but if it isn't, just wanted to mention that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Great
much.
stuff.
Thank you.
And now, item number 6, Workforce Supplier and Diversity Development Director Jill Griffin. Oh. No,
We haven't been on all day.
we haven't been on all day?
No,
We're not streaming live?
just, but not us, just the document.
Well, they were,
What point, what are you saying?
this morning they were.
No, all the documents have been, not us. That's what Enrique was pointing out.
I don't know, I can't hear what you're saying. What's the issue here?
Does the stream carry just what's on that screen, Rob? Is the live stream carrying only what's showing up on that screen?
Enrique's point. No, we're good to go. So it's just this one,
Right.
the monitor.
Just the monitor.
So what we're looking at is not the live stream? Yes, it is not. Okay.
Yes, it is not.
Different than
Vote yes on no.
Yes, we have. We want to make sure everybody can see your lovely shining face.
Right. I have no idea what we just did, but let's move along. Director Griffin.
Chairman Crosby, Commissioners, as you all know, themes of economic and workforce development, as well as opportunity for the unemployed and underemployed, are woven throughout the gaming law. The law and our own regulations set a priority for diversity in all stages of the casino, including design, construction, and operations. In fact, 23K Section 15 stipulates that each gaming licensee must formulate for commission approval and abide by an affirmative action program of equal opportunity, whereby the operator establishes specific goals for the utilization of minorities, women, and veterans on the construction jobs. And those goals need to be equal or greater to the goals contained in Administrative Bulletin Number 14. That's 15.3% minority and 6.9% women. Section 3 of Administrative 14 says that the contractor shall strive to achieve the labor participation goals in each job category, including bricklayers, carpenters, cement masons, electricians, iron workers, and so on. At our last meeting, we had a presentation from Susan Moyer from UMass Boston and Liz Skidmore from the Carpenters Union. They're both members of the policy group on tradeswomen's issues. And I think Susan is here today with us. They presented best practices for achieving gender diversity during construction. So on November 7th, I will be presenting to you a recommendation that the Mass Gaming Commission establish an Access and Opportunity Committee to both provide transparency regarding the progress towards diversity and to recommend actions to increase the level of minority, women, and veterans as employees and vendors during construction. Unions are integral to the success of the diversity during construction. Commissioners, I have representatives today from the Regional Council of Carpenters and the Building and Construction Trades Council. These are unions that are leaders in diversity efforts and will be our partners on the ground. So I'd like to introduce you to Mark Ehrlich, to my immediate left, Executive Secretary and Treasurer of the New England Regional Council of Carpenters. And then to his left, Brian Doherty, Secretary Treasurer and General Agent of the Building and Construction Trades Council.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thank you for listening to Brian and me today on this critically important subject. I'll talk a little bit about my personal situation. I joined the Carpenters Union in 1975, a long time ago. I have a lot of gray hair I didn't have back then, as well as a few other things. And it was a very different union. Back then it was really kind of a father-son, uncle-nephew dynamic, and mostly comprised of white men, and diversity was not an issue that was either taken all that seriously or much of a priority at any level of the industry. Fast forward, it's now 2014, it's a very different world. I've been the head of the New England Regional Council of Carpenters. We cover the 6 New England states. We have about 19,000 members. And we are, I can say with a great deal of pride, a diverse union. It is a very, very different union than the one I joined. You know, people are always asking about statistics, and probably the most reliable statistic that I think that we can provide is by looking at our apprenticeship. The membership data is actually not broken out by race and ethnicity. The apprenticeship data, because of the role of the state and the federal government in apprenticeship training, is, and if you look at our Boston area locals, which sort of cover the geographic district equivalent to the Boston SMSA, which is about 35% minority, our apprenticeship program is 35% minority. So we are what I would consider reflective of the demographics in the union.
Is that the apprenticeship program at this moment in time?
At this moment in time.
And how long has that been the case? Going
10
back?
years.
Okay.
10 years. So, and it's important to understand the value of apprenticeship statistics, because that's the future. That's the future of the industry. We are in an interesting moment in time in the industry where, because of the depth of the recession from 2008 to 2012, depending on when, it was about 4 or 5 years of between 30 and 40% unemployment. Nobody new came into the unions. There were no jobs. With that level of unemployment, you could barely keep the existing membership working. So you had a whole group of people who aged that 4 or 5 years without being replaced by anybody incoming new, which means that there's a tremendous opportunity now with the economic recovery that we're facing. There will be people retiring. The workforce got 4 or 5 years older without any replacement, and therefore the opportunities are there in an almost unprecedented way for the casinos and for all the other construction that is going on. So this is a great time to be thinking about the issue of diversity. We have 24 locals in New England, 13 in Massachusetts, and 3 of them, 2 African-American leaders and 1 Latino head of the union. So it's a completely different world in the Carpenters organization. We still have a long ways to go. Our numbers around the inclusion of women is not what we would like it to be, and there's more of a need for aggressive outreach and recruitment there. But the difference is that the culture has changed, and that from top to bottom there's an eagerness and willingness to reflect the demographics of the communities that we live and work in. I live in the city, have for all my adult life, and I'm committed to that on a personal basis. So I guess the real question then becomes, well, what do you do? How do you make it happen? What are the impacts? You heard as a commission from Susan and Liz about their best practices, which I think is probably one of the better documents about nuts and bolts. I will say this, I've been doing this for a long time. I was on the Diversity Compliance Committee with then Senator Wilkerson for the Convention Center. I've been doing this for many, many years. It is really simple, which is that you put a laser-like focus on the issue from the beginning of the job and you don't ever let it go. And everybody who is involved, from the general contractors to the subcontractors, has to know that there is a carrot and a stick associated with having a diverse workforce, that if they want to work on the Wynn Casino, if they want to work on the MGM Casino, this is part of the deal. It comes with it, because it's a commitment to a diverse workforce. And if you're not committed to that, if you're not interested in that, well, then don't work here. There's other work you can do. But if you're going to be part of a gaming commission project, then you have to be committed to that and have goals and standards and metrics that are measured, and in some ways have compensation related to the ability to meet those goals and standards. It is remarkable with all the discussion about color in the industry, the one that is green is the one that really drives people's decision making. If you are going to get paid or not get paid, suddenly your behavior changes. And it is going back to the Kroc Center with the Salvation Army. That was an example of a private job, where the ownership said from the beginning, this is built in a community of color, the workforce has to reflect the communities of color. Everybody was told that, every subcontractor was told that. They were measured every single week. If they weren't in compliance, they had to fix it right away, or payments were withheld. And guess what? The numbers were excellent. UMass, Boston, PLA, same thing. It is really a question of riding herd. And again, Susan and Liz's piece on best practices talks about the role of the owners, talks about the role of the general contractors, talks about the role of the subs. Everybody has to have a set of steps in which they are held accountable to, including us, including the union side. And if that happens, these goals are eminently achievable. And if it doesn't happen, they won't be met. It is as simple and clear as that. So I work very closely with my friend Brian Doherty around these issues, who is the same level of commitment, and he can describe the programs that he's come out of with the building pathways and what he's doing now at the building trades. But between the two of us, you have a very ringing commitment to the issue of transforming the construction industry workforce. Long overdue. It's happening. It's underway. And there's no reason why in this next decade we really can't make enormous strides. Thank you.
Question, Mark? I'm curious as to why you don't track diversity numbers only with the apprentices. Why don't you track that information with the general membership?
The membership database that we use is one that our international union has developed. It's covers the United States and Canada. They designed it, I didn't. They don't have fields for race or ethnicity in it, so that's why I can't tell you. That's the database we use.
It
I'm
doesn't
not
make a
defend- I'm not
compelling
defending it,
argument that
Commissioner.
you're interested in this when you don't track the information.
Well, again, I think that that its value, you can track it in terms of the apprenticeship because, especially at a period of time now, that's the workforce of the future.
How many apprentices become full-time members? What's the percentage?
There's a churn factor in the first year. Some people come into the apprenticeship. We try to do, we are getting better and better at screening and preparing people. Some people think they're going to, work in this old house when they decide to become a union carpenter, and they find out that they're humping concrete forms in the middle of a 3-degree weather in the winter, and so it's not quite as attractive as they thought it was going to be. So we have about a 25 to 30% dropout rate in the first year, but after that, almost all of them become a journeyman.
Do you track the percentage of the 35% that make it into the full membership?
Yeah.
And
it's
are the numbers consistent?
The
that-
churn factor is about the same across the board.
With women and minorities?
Yeah, maybe a little bit higher. We are now beefing up our mentoring program within the apprenticeship to make sure that people don't fall through the cracks and that they get the support. It still can be, there's no other way to say it, on occasion a hostile work environment, especially for a woman. Working to be one woman on a crew of 50 men can be a pretty tough situation, and there's a real strong need for support groups and mentoring to make sure that people can survive and thrive in that environment.
Right. And you mentioned certain projects require a diverse workforce, which means certain projects don't.
That's correct.
And does that mean there's no effort there at all for those projects? Or is there an effort put into all of the projects, even though it's not a requirement?
Well, I'm sure you know, the projects that require are, the Boston Jobs Ordinance, which covers all publicly funded jobs in the city and private jobs over 100,000 square feet. And then state-funded jobs have their own goals that they try to meet. If you were to talk about some hospital in the suburbs that is built that is either that the ownership plays no part, then it's simply a question of that we supply a workforce that is diverse, but there's no goals typically there.
Okay, thank you.
Good questions. Welcome. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Thank you for this opportunity. And I'd like to say thank you to my colleague, Mark Ehrlich. Mark is a pioneer in this campaign for diversity in the construction trades. I'm honored and privileged to be sitting next to him and to actually learn from a lot of the efforts he's put in place over his career. But, so thank you, Mark. And then just moving on to some of the stuff I wanted to mention today was similar to Mark. I started my career here, right here in Boston 16 years ago. At the age of 18, I had an opportunity after high school to join the Big Dig. It was a major time of looking for opportunity. There was a big economic boom going on because of the Central Artery Tunnel project. I graduated high school on a Friday. I was working by Monday. I was very lucky. I was very fortunate to have that opportunity. After applying to the Laborers Union in Boston, Local 223. So the reason I'd like to catch up to my career, but just quickly, the story that I want to tell today is the story of what unions do for families. My parents are immigrants to this country. They came separately. They came, they worked hard, and they were afforded an opportunity to join a union. My mother right here across the street for the International Longshoremen's Association on the waterfront, where she worked very long hours, very hard manual labor as a young woman in this country, and she did that to make it and survive here. And when she did that, she was given some decent wages, access to health care, and a decent retirement if she chose to take it. She was a young woman then working toward it. But my father, the same situation. He joined the construction trades, was given the same benefits that a union career provides to you. They met, they married, they had 8 children here in Boston, Massachusetts. They met in Roxbury. 8 children. I am very proud to say that my parents put 8 kids through college because, again, they had access to decent wages, they had access to health care, which meant one of those children wasn't going to bankrupt them if they got sick, and they could put food on the table every night. And because of economic opportunities that happened for them 50 years ago and 16 years ago for me, and now potentially more opportunities in 2014, we want that same story of no matter where you come from or who you are or what you look like, we want these economic opportunities to benefit everyone and their families. So that's the position we're taking at the building trades. I've had the very fortunate opportunity to learn from colleagues like Mark Ehrlich, Mark Fortune, the president of the building trades, my predecessor, Martin J. Walsh, he took over as mayor of the city of Boston. And when he took over the building trades, we saw that there was not being enough done in diversity. So we immediately enacted campaigns to create stronger outreach to our apprenticeship programs. We created the Building Pathways program, which was essentially a campaign to go into every community, every part of the city, every part of this region to tell people that if you want a career in construction, come get it. Doesn't matter where you come from, what's your background. The message is this: if you want a career in construction, come apply to our programs. That's the message, and that's where we're taking this movement forward. So it's not that simple. And what we had to do is we had to do a lot of outreach, and I'm proud to say I was talking to Susan Moyer, another colleague, and just to be clear, I am the general agent for the building trades, which represents thousands of working families in this Eastern Mass region. I am the former project coordinator for Building Pathways, and I am a current co-convener of the policy group on trades and women's issues with the Regional Council of Carpenters, the Building Trades, UMass Boston, and some community groups. I'm sorry, let me pull back UMass Boston. A professor at UMass Boston is a convener of that group. So 3 years ago, the mayor took over the building trades and said that he always had the attitude of we can do more for more people, so immediately opened up more programming, more opportunities to make sure that there was a change. And I recognize in the past 30 years, this has been a white male-dominated industry. We are, and have been, to Mark's point, making strident efforts to change that. And we have kicked that into I would say, high gear for the past 3 years. We're very proud to say we've almost doubled the number of women in the city, in the Eastern Mass region, from the national average from 3%, which it was plaguing the industry, but here in Boston, we're between 5 and 6%. So that's a major step, because we've changed our policies from, there are practices, there are best practices, which I think we should discuss today, that can lead to changes, such as seeking women and the proactive steps it takes to let everyone know now is the time. So I just want to talk about a couple of things that have worked over the past few years. In my current term, I've been in the general agent's position for 15 months. What I've seen is that jobs where workers are protected, project labor agreements are in place, or some type of community benefits agreement, access and opportunity committees are put in place, or where there is some type of vehicle or conduit for everyone to come to the same table and shine a light on all stakeholders' expectations, there has been room and some growth around good things happening. At UMass Boston, they've met the Boston Residents' Jobs Policy numbers for the first time on a project in the city that I can think of, except the one Mark mentioned, the Kroc Center. And the best impact have happened on unionized sector or organized sector jobs. And this is not in any way a union versus non-union conversation. This is a conversation about protecting all workers, no matter what sector they're in. I can just say firmly that workers will be more protected when they have union representation or a collective bargaining agreement. So I am very pleased to see a project labor agreement on this particular development. Some of the things that we've also done have created, as a building trades, we've reached out to all the high schools in the city of Boston. We're reaching out to the high schools in the regional sector, which would be the towns of Medford, Somerville, Chelsea, Revere, Everett, around the city of Boston, as you go out in concentric circles in trying to regionalize the access and opportunity for these programs. Building Pathways has had some major success in the city. We've put over 125 people into the trades, half of which have been women. Over 90% have been people of color. 4% were at one time actually experiencing homelessness. So some good things have happened. But that vehicle, that Building Pathways project, has been what my colleague Susan Moyer called the anchor conversation, which was it gave everybody a chance to come and talk about something very important to each stakeholder, whether you're an elected official, a constituent group, a community group, your labor, a contractor, a subcontractor, academia, et cetera. You are coming to the same table to put a focus on this important issue. So that has happened through a couple of efforts. Our training programs have all opened their doors and increased their application. We have streamlined the application process. We've made it public for all application times, dates, who are the contact people. We've simplified the versions. We've created sensitivity training programs. And I think that I would just like to say that we are putting the steps in place to make this a fair, equitable opportunity for everyone. And if you can use this as an opportunity to promote the message, I do want to make clear the message is very simple. If you want a career in the building trades, the time is now to get it. come apply to our programs, regardless of anything. Now is the time to apply to our programs. So I'm happy to answer questions or talk about best practices that we put in place, but I would like to say thank you for your time, and thank you for letting us share, as organized labor, that we are here to do good things for every community, for every family, for every worker, and that's our role in this. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Encouraged to hear about the, the ongoing kind of recruitment efforts, and even kind of going down into the high schools and talking to people who might not have thought about this as a career until now. And Brian, as you just mentioned, kind of highlighting the sensitivity trainings that you're doing. I mean, it's great to recruit, but if they walk into that hostile work environment, all your recruitment efforts are going to go out the window.
Right.
The question that's come up has been thinking about the appeal of these projects. Again, I'm from Springfield. The MGM project is going to be the biggest private construction project in Western Massachusetts in the history of the region. Thinking about, what should we be looking for maybe in terms of apprentice participation, one, to help increase the diversity numbers, but any other recommendations you would have for us in looking at that piece of the construction project in terms of a percentage of apprentices, or does that vary by region or by, kind of locale?
I think that's a fair question. This is not a dodge in any way. I represent Greater Boston. I represent the metropolitan area, which is a different demographic population than other parts of the state.
Okay.
They would be under the same training programs and the same outreach opportunities, and the same numbers for compliance goals. Okay. So there is no reason none of these goals should be met. All of these goals should be met on all of these projects. I think putting a proactive plan in place from day one till the time we're handing the keys over to the casino or whoever the end user developer that is the type of commitment we need to see these numbers stay and maintain a decent level of percentages. And there was a question asked, and I think it's a good question and a fair question, and it was, do we track all jobs? And something that we found, because we are looking at this in a very, we have our partners in academia, we have our partners in our research departments, we're trying to drill down to see what's actually happening on these job sites. What we're trying to avoid is, what we're trying to promote is that any of our workers, they become part of a core crew, meaning that these compliance goals, they incentivize making sure we meet the numbers, but they also incentivize what we call checkerboarding, or making sure that they're meeting the numbers, which means you might get 6 weeks on this project, 6 weeks on the next project, and you actually don't get the training you deserve by spending a full year or 2 years or 3 years. So when you come into one of our programs, we want you to have all of the on-the-job training you can receive, plus all of the schoolwork and a full-time course load, but we want to see you make relationships with your contractor or your subcontractor and really have a 30-year career out of it. So we want to avoid working toward the numbers. We're working toward protecting the worker, making sure that every worker has the training and the opportunity necessary to have a fruitful career. So when we don't track them on jobs, we are still promoting that they stay in that contractor base or in their company, on their team, learning their skills. I think it's a fair question, but there are a few other best practices that we've done, core crews being one of them, creating some type of oversight committee such as Access and Opportunity, just continuing to shine the light on it and look for best practices. At first glance, it might seem that it would be appropriate to keep the numbers up on jobs where we're screening them, but the commitment from labor is the worker comes first. The worker should be in a position where they can do well for themselves and their family. And we've seen that keeping them in a good position or in a good environment is the best way to make that happen. But as far as percentages, we have increased them quite a bit, and we have a long way to go. And I think it's going to take that proactive nature to continue improving these numbers. So I don't know if that answers directly, but so I'll put it down.
I can speak a little bit to Springfield. We have a local 108 that covers Western Massachusetts, Hampton, Berkshire counties, Springfield, and I don't know the exact numbers, but it's a very diverse membership out there. Probably in terms of racial groups, maybe it's slightly less African American and more Latino, given the population that exists in Springfield, Holyoke, and Chicopee, et cetera. So I am not concerned at all about, at least I don't know enough about the other trades, but with respect to our trade, meeting the goals. In terms of specific things that you can do, I can tell you what doesn't work. What doesn't work is saying, yeah, we want to, we have these goals, or they're on paper, they're in the contract, and then nobody pays attention to it. And then somebody comes along, a compliance officer, whether this is the city of Boston or whether it's a state or whoever it is, whoever the owner happens to be, and then 6 months into the job says, wait a minute, the numbers are terrible. And then there's a Chinese fire drill, everybody starts running around like crazy, and everybody starts yelling at each other, and the subcontract, and it's important to remember in our business that increasingly the actual workers are primarily employed by the subcontractors and not the general contractor or construction manager. And that will be the case with the casinos, for sure. So the onus is really on the subcontractors, and some of them are interested in changing the nature of the industry, and quite frankly, some of them aren't. And so unless their feet are held to the fire. So what happens is the numbers are bad because they bring their usual workforce to the job, and the workforce is primarily white and primarily male. And then someone tells them, hey, you're not meeting your goals. And so then they call up the union, and they say, send X, Y, or Z to fill in whatever. And the job is already 80% done. And they're trying to sort of cover their reputation with, or parts of their anatomy in terms of not having been compliant from the beginning. And that's a disaster. That's a disaster for everybody, because the people who are sent there recognize that they're only being sent there in order to meet goals and criteria. They're not necessarily treated with respect. And it's not a comfortable work situation for anybody, and there's an enormous amount of resentment all over the place, and it doesn't work. What works is to tell the subcontractors from the beginning, you start the first week of the job with a crew that is compliant with the numbers that we are trying to do. They should be part of your core crew, not fill-in folks that the union provides. That's not the way to think about this. It's about ultimately transforming the industry and the people who move with those subcontractors from job to job to job. You're in a position, as a gaming commission, with two massive projects, to be able to set the tone for how this is going to be done. That tone has to be set both verbally and contractually from the beginning. And I would argue even more strongly that there need to be carrots and sticks for rewards or incentives and disincentives for people who are either compliant or non-compliant. And if there's a subcontractor in some trade who doesn't want to go along with that program, that's fine. They just shouldn't be working in Springfield or in Everett, that's all. And I think you're in a position to really make that crystal clear, along with the owners, to say this is what we want, this is what we insist on, and here is the language in the contract that you're going to be held accountable for. It's no different from saying, I want the color of that wall painted a certain color. It's the same thing. It can be part of it can be written into the contract, and these are your goals, these are your specifications that you're required to meet in order to get paid appropriately. It's remarkable what happens when language like that is in a contract.
If I may touch on it also, I think there are a couple of things that are very important here. I think political will is very important. I think the owner end user needs to be from the top saying this, while every level of this pyramid or every level of this structure, whether vertical or horizontal, is saying the same thing, that this is important to both the unions, the contractors, the subs, pushing everybody at the same time. Some simple steps, to Mark's point, you have to come on the site with a diverse workforce to maintain that throughout the project. You can't play catch up if you start on the wrong foot. One of the simple things that a construction or any project management team will do is create a Gantt chart that tells you when something is coming into a project. We can do the same thing for work hours, we can do the same thing. And when you have that work hour, you are going to know that if you need 10% of 10 hours, you need at least 1 hour covered by someone that fits in that demographic. You can break down the hours by what number of people you need on each crew coming into it. That could be something that's put into the bid specs so that you're focused just as much on having the material on site as you are a workforce reflective of the efforts by the joint political capital. Just this past year, 2.5 months ago, Mark and I co-convened with all of the general contractors in this region, pretty much the big ones you can think of, and the subcontractor base do things in a responsible way. We had a large, first ever building summit, which brought all of the folks that actually do the building of these projects into the same room. Because oftentimes what happens is you'll have the subcontractor blaming the general contractor, the general blaming the unions, and the unions blaming the sub, or some variation of a siloed conversation. We are no longer interested in the siloed conversations, but bringing everyone to the same table to have the bigger conversation, which is, there's something amiss right now. How do we fix it? Solutions-based, solutions-oriented. Eliminate the blame game, eliminate ways that you can get away or out of doing the diversity piece, and just bring it into the same conversation. That's the first time that's ever happened. There are over 300 subcontractors in the room with the probably 12 or 14 biggest general contractors in Massachusetts in the room, with all of organized labor in the construction industry saying the same thing. Diversity is important to us. The political will is here. I think the political will needs to be there from every level, speaking the same language. And I would ask that that is throughout the entire project of all 3 projects, or however many projects there are, that is kept at the table the entire time. We have found that seeking women drives this conversation, that they are the most underrepresented demographic in the industry. So when you focus on the most difficult piece, the other pieces start to come up with them. Drive that woman number, let everybody know. I had the very fortunate opportunity to go to college because of the wages that my family, when I started working. And after that, I opened a nonprofit to help kids in Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, South Boston, Hyde Park, get into high school and college through sports, academics, nutrition, wellness, just providing resources to folks that may or may not have it. But what I saw was there has to be a level of changing the conversation, that if we continue to say that you can't get into these trades, someone's going to hear that and believe it. I think the message has to be, if you want to be part of it, go take advantage of it. So from your level, from our level, we're doing that. We're saying that if you want this, come get it. I think that conversation has to change. I want everybody that speaks on this type of, on our industry or on this message, they should be speaking from the same script. The ethos of what's happening in this industry has to change. It has already thawed. The time to get in has changed. That was years ago. The time to do better is now as we move forward. So I think all of those different pieces should remain in the conversation that we are jointly having as an entire stakeholder group. So I'd just like to make those points too. Thank you.
One just quick final point, if I can. The license conditions that we've given our 2 license designees for the Category 1s require them, once they select a general contractor, to come in and meet with us personally to talk about what those diversity goals, obviously, and how important those are. So, Mark, to your point, we're starting off the conversation as early as we possibly can. The interesting kind of new nuance to out of the gaming legislation was veterans. And you probably have a lot of veterans in your workforce who may or may not self-identify themselves as having been in the armed services. Any thoughts or any ideas as to what the population of your membership is? Just kind of a ballpark to see how many have, military experience prior to getting into the construction trades. It's a number we really haven't talked about, so I'm just curious as to any thoughts you had on that.
I would be hesitant to estimate numbers with any kind of reliability. We have had a partnership with a program called Helmets to Hard Hats for many years, which has been returning veterans. Look, there's a level, in some ways there's a very simple crossover from serving in the military to serving on a construction site. There's a high level of discipline required. You got to be there on time, and once you're there, it is, there's no fooling around. You work under unpleasant conditions out in the open. So there's actually a kind of synergy between people who have succeeded in the military and people who succeed in construction. So the numbers are high. I don't know what they are. And what's interesting now is, as the military has become significantly more diverse, that the Helmets to Hard Hats program has actually been one of the programs that has helped add to the diversity of the construction workforce. And many of the most successful women who have come into the trades have military background.
Interesting. Brian, do you know how many positions are there in all of your apprenticeship programs at any given year, roughly?
It's a good question. So I would speak to the trend if I can, and it's very tied very much to the economic cycle. We are a boom and bust industry
Yeah.
as we ramp up. So just simply put, ballpark number, it'd be tough to say, but I do know that we have had internal meetings both in DC, here at the state level, and then at the council level, and we're trying to track the markets a bit. We have doubled and tripled our apprenticeship programs in the past 2 years. We're expecting to triple them next year. So the time is now for opportunity. I think with all the cranes in the city of Boston and the outlying immediate areas, plus the additional 3 major projects through this gaming legislation, that type of, we are preparing for the larger opportunity space to come in. So as a ballpark number, I don't have that for you off the top of my head.
You know, 500, 1,000, 10,000?
I can just, well, I think maybe we can project. So I cover all of New England. Our apprentice training facility is in Millbury, Massachusetts, central Massachusetts. I like to say it's equally inconvenient for everybody. And we were at 250 apprentices in 2011. Now that's for Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. Connecticut we're about to merge that in. We're now at 1,100.
Wow.
We've quadrupled it in 4 years. And the diversity, you walk in there and it feels extremely diverse.
So how many,
So we probably represent maybe a third of the jobs on one of these.
Right.
So I think you could
right.
kind of extrapolate.
Well,
from that.
how many members are in your collective group? Total members? What's the membership of your council?
So we represent 20 trades, and those trades are just about anybody you can think of in roads and bridges infrastructure, in commercial high rises, or infrastructure work, or any type of vertical building. In this area, those 20 trades have 35,000 members.
35,000?
But again, what gets tricky is there's a regional impact. Some of the trades that I represent are New England trades. Some of them are tri-state trades.
Okay. But I just...
In this area, there are thousands. I wouldn't venture a guess much more than 14,000 maybe. And yeah, and even that is, and I'm talking specifically, again, to the Boston region. So to the statewide number, I think it's 75,000. But that's family members. That's
Yeah.
So I'm basing this on our healthcare coverage.
Is Susan volunteering to speak?
3,757 is the answer to your question.
Which question?
How many apprentices out there in Massachusetts?
In Massachusetts, 3,600 and some.
3,757 as of the last quarterly report. So that's a 20% increase since last year.
And that's in Massachusetts, in the construction trades.
Across the state.
Yeah. Oh, great. You ought to get a little guidance from Susan on your data.
She's a great teammate. We can always rely on Susan.
Great. So that's
Thank you,
interesting.
Susan.
Great. Right. As long as she's plugged in, I think. All right. Well, this is really good, and we appreciate, this has got to come from every direction, and having it come from the heads of the unions is, as you well understand, is really critical. So we really appreciate this.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I would just like to simply put it once more. The political capital, the political will is different than it used to be, and moving forward, it is going to reflect economic and social opportunities for everybody. So now's the time to get in.
Great.
And the future.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate your.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that it for you, Jill? That's it. Okay, thank you. General Counsel Blue.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
You have in your packet today.
Is that mic working?
Try it now.
Doesn't sound like it.
That one is.
Yeah.
Will change.
There you go.
Yeah, that worked.
You have in your packet today a set of regulations for the Racehorse Development Fund. And I think, just to give you sort of a broad overview, there's actually 2 regulations in that packet. The reason for it is that the Racehorse Development Fund is found in 23K, And so those regulations may end up in the section of regulations that pertain to 23K. The second group of regulations, which gives the commission some flexibility on race course licensing, will probably end up under the 128A regulations. So we've separated them, but they do work together and they do have some interaction. So to go over the high points, the Racehorse Development Fund regulations, as we discussed last time, are put forward to give some clarity as to how that money will be used and how it will be paid out. This is a very new fund under the Commission's statute, so this is a good time to take a look at how we're going to deal with that. It does a few things. It requires someone who holds a racing license to notify the Commission if it's going to take any kind of action, action being something like shutting down, transferring a license, going dark. And then and they have to give the Commission 30 days prior notice. Once they give that to the Commission, these regs give the Commission the authority to hold a hearing and determine what's best to do given the situation that's in front of the Commission. The regs go out to talk about how the Racehorse Development Fund is paid out. It tracks the statute, but there are some places where the statute isn't quite as clear, and so we've tried to clarify that in the regs. It describes how the funds will be distributed by a licensee once a licensee gets them, and that's also set by statute. It gives the Commission the authority to hold certain funds in escrow, and especially in the situation where there's a track that goes dark or a license that's being transferred or something else that's occurring that the Commission feels in the best interest of the industry, it would make sense to hold the funds in escrow. It does make payment of the racehorse development funds contingent upon the licensee accepting and adhering to safety standards as they're adopted by the Commission. And the idea is that this pot of money under the Racehorse Development Fund is a little different from the purse money that came out under 128A. And so in this situation, we thought it would be a good idea for the Commission to at least suggest that before you can receive payment as a licensee, you adhere to whatever broad safety standards the Commission has adopted for racing. Let's see, the funds can be escrowed by the Commission for up to 3 years. And what we've also done is given the Horse Racing Committee the ability and the authority to determine the split of racehorse development funds if there is more than one licensee in a particular area. So for example, if there were 3 harness racing licensees, we would go back to the Racehorse Committee and ask them to determine how that money should be split between multiple licensees. We just think that's a fair way to go.
Could they rethink the overall split, or is that locked in stone and you could only take say the harness racing 25% and split it 3 ways?
Well, essentially, it's both. The Racehorse Committee does have the right to rethink the split,
Okay.
and they have talked about looking at that annually. This would be sort of a subset of that
Right.
once they've determined the split.
Right, okay.
Under the second set of regs that deal with the application, these regulations give the Commission the ability to waive deadlines for the filing or for acting on an application under certain circumstances. So if, for example, there were no licensee in the Commonwealth and someone came forward outside of the timeframes, if an existing licensee has submitted notice to the Commission that it's not going to request a renewal of its license, it gives the Commission some flexibility on taking applications and making decisions. These regs also allow the Commission to take supplemental information up to 45 days before the beginning of a meet. That 45-day number is arbitrary, and I think we want to give some thought to that because it depends on when the meet starts, obviously, but it would also depend perhaps on the situation in front of the commission and whether you had certain investigations to do or certain things you wanted to look at, and whether 45 days before the start of a meet was enough time in which to do that. So that I would appreciate direction from the Commission. And then finally, the regs give the Commission the ability to hold application checks in escrow and to require that a bond, which is required by statute, be submitted 30 days after award instead of with the application.
Yeah, the one piece and you just brought it up, I don't think 45 days is enough time in order to complete an investigation on the application, and hiring alone is a process that takes some time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we should rethink that 45 days, and I do think we need more time. Yeah, I'm thinking maybe 90 days would be appropriate.
Anybody else have thoughts about that?
Yeah, it was a question that kind of came up as we've gone through the hearing process this week in terms of, we know that the application process is somewhat fluid. We know that some of these applications are kind of placeholder applications. So I also thought 45 days might be a little bit too close. I also think that there's got to be some communication back and forth, kind of in an ongoing nature between our agency and whoever the applicants are, to let them know what the deficiencies are to the extent that we can, so we don't bump up against some of these timeframes. But yeah, I'd like to see it extended out. 90 days certainly sounds doable. We'll get some feedback on that, obviously, when these come up.
Anything else?
A lot of the funds are paid, or the funds, I haven't looked at this in detail, but one of the first reactions I had that the funds will be paid to the horse racing associations, provided that they are associated with a racing licensee, or how is that nexus to the racing licensee?
The language in Section 60 of 23K is a little bit vague. So what we did in the regulations was set it up so that the 80%, which is the purse money, would go to a racing association. The 16% and then the 4% could come directly from the commission to the breeders program, because the statute says it can go to a breeders program approved by the commission. And the 4% that I always refer to as health and welfare benefits can go into an account set up for health and welfare benefits. So we tried to give the commission the flexibility to make the smaller of the three payments go directly to a place that's not associated with a licensee, but that the bigger amount would go to the licensed racing association.
Which would be the racing licensee?
Yes, it would be.
Okay, same, okay.
Yes.
We discussed the issue of if, in fact, the licensee happens to be, for example, the horseman. And so decisions on using that money, that complicates the decisions on how to use that money.
Well, and so for the benefit of, I think, the folks that are listening to us or watching us, what has happened in the past with the money that goes into purses now is that money is a piece of the wagers. And that money stays with the licensee, and the licensee takes that money, commingles it with other funds, and then enters into a purse agreement with the horsemen's group. In that situation, by contract, the licensee and the horsemen's group can determine what they're going to do with that purse money. In this situation, where the money is coming from gaming license fees and then in the future from ongoing gaming revenues, the commission would want to consider what would happen when that money went to a licensee if the licensee were the same entity as the group that was entering into the purse agreement. It strikes me initially as it would be sort of like someone doing a contract with themselves, and so the commission might want to consider what additional either conditions they would put on the license if that were the situation, or perhaps, you know, I'm sure we'll get comments on the regs, but perhaps if we need to add more to the regs to address that particular situation. But it is something to think about, because that's not commonly what happens now.
I'm thinking a condition on a license would be appropriate, and maybe a plan that would have to be approved.
Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, we probably should have just a brief discussion about emergency regulations, whether or not there is a case, I think, for these to be moved forward as an emergency. I'm guessing if we did the public comment, we could probably accomplish that by the November 20th meeting. Of course, we have the distributions. We're assuming the distributions would take place in November. And then the second set that Catherine's been talking about are the second set of regulations govern the applications we have now, so that's kind of why we need them in effect before we can go over the process. And the process in this case is about 160 days, I think, by the time it gets done.
It's longer. This has the additional time before the legislature that our 23K regs do not.
So do we need to act on that, or what's your,
Well, I was just wanting to run it by the commission here just briefly. That's kind of the thought process, and as we prepared them to bring them back to the commission, that's how we prepared them.
does that make sense to you? Time-wise?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll put them out for informal comment now, bring them back on the 20th? Okay, we can certainly do that.
Okay. Great. Great. Next one. Thank you.
The next item that you have in your package, you have 3 amended small business impact statements. These are for the capital investment regs, for the surveillance regs, and the regulatory monitoring and inspections. These are all regulations that have gone through the public hearing process, and this is just the final step to file them. You also have in your package comments from Penn and MGM on the surveillance regs. We did consider their very thoughtful comments very carefully. We think we've addressed them, you know, to a broad degree in the regulations themselves, so we didn't make any additional changes, but we did appreciate the comments, and we did go back and review them as against what we had. So if the commission would vote to approve the amended small business impact statements and the regulations as they stand, we will file them, and then they will go through the process and become final.
So this is just on the SBIS, what you're,
It's on the amended SBIS, yes. And the regulations we have attached to them.
so this would be, I'm sorry, so you're looking for final approval of these regs?
Yes,
As
so
well.
we can move them forward. And Mr. Grossman advises me, we did make some changes to the surveillance regs based upon comments we received, but they are in here, and they've gone through the public hearing process.
Okay.
Did we make some change to the, in response to the comment that I think we got both from, we got more than one, about taking over the surveillance room and excluding people from it?
Yeah.
Good afternoon again.
Good afternoon.
I'm not sure if this draft made it into the packet. We've taken a look at all of the comments and made some recommendations in red in the draft, incorporating some of the comments. If you compare the comments received from Penn National and from MGM, you'll see that they were in agreement in a number of areas. In response, we wanted to address some of those areas in here. And to get to that one in particular.
Well, could I just stop you there, because my draft doesn't have any red.
Like on,
Yeah, it's the top of page
Do
2.
you know what page that is in the packet?
2.
like your draft of
It's page 160 in the
205,
Commissioner's
141
packet.
does not have it.
What page?
Page 160 in the Commissioner's packet. It's page 2 of our actual draft.
It's one, you're talking CMR 141?
Yes.
Mine has red.
Yeah, so I see that their concerns about security have been addressed, but not, I don't see the piece about the surveillance room.
It'd be 141.02 A2.
So it's the top of page 2, paragraph 2.
So only in an extreme situation is how you
Yeah.
address that?
It basically, we
There are
add
no
in.
alternative-
Yeah, no alternative means to do that, and we felt that whatever investigation they're doing might be compromised if we didn't take that action. It's in some other jurisdictions. I don't think it's ever been used, but you don't want to take the possibility out totally that a circumstance might arise that you might need to do that.
What kind of a circumstance might arise when you need to do that?
If you
I
felt
thought their
that-
comments made sense.
I would say that if you felt somebody in the room was involved in this in some form or fashion and
Yes.
would compromise what you're trying to do or tip off somebody as to what you're trying to do, it just gives you the option to do it, forward an investigation. I would be surprised if it was ever used, but you don't want to take out that possibility altogether.
Yeah, that was the only circumstance I could think of, is
Yes.
someone in that room as part of
Yes.
the investigation.
Yep.
Couldn't that be part of the regulation?
Well, no, then they'd know if you did it, that's what you were doing.
Well,
That's not going to help an investigation if the person knows that you're looking at them.
I hear what you're saying, but it seemed to me that they've got a great deal of responsibility that they're implementing through this surveillance system, and I thought, except in an extraordinary circumstance, which it seems to me we ought to be able to define, excluding them from this area impedes their ability to control the safety of the premises that they're responsible for.
I think all they're saying is that's true, and it probably would never happen, but there might be theoretically a situation where it could be called for.
Yeah. And the security is a joint operation.
Well,
The troopers that would be in there would certainly.
oh,
they're
I don't
part
have
of
any
the-
trouble with the troopers, but it's who's ultimately responsible for it. Suppose we exclude people there and something goes wrong, and somebody gets hurt, are we then, is the commission then responsible for something that could have been prevented had the people been there who knew what they were looking for?
Troopers that work in gaming are very familiar with surveillance
Oh, I
rooms and are
understand.
very capable of monitoring those cameras
Okay.
during an investigation.
All right. I hear you.
No, and
I
I
disagree.
had the same concern, other than when we explain it, no alternative means. And that is really rare. I'm comfortable with that additional language.
All right. Any others?
I just had a quick question to come back on page 6, the requirement of how long you need to keep a recording.
The 30-day?
Yeah, we start to deviate and say the licensee can ask us for permission, not the whole, why don't we just leave it at 30, cut and dry?
It became, I think, more of a storage issue. There would be certain filming that, because they're kind of required to film everything they do. And let's say of an escalator or something like that, they might want to only keep for 7 days. And I don't really see as that being a huge issue if that's what they would want to keep as a, retention period for that. I would say gaming operations and things that are happening on the floor or in the cage, you certainly would want to keep for 30 days. 30 is probably the highest limit in the country. The original, most people use 7, but that was originally designed because videotape was being used, and the number of tapes that you'd have to make them retain more was ridiculous. But 30, I think, is certainly a reasonable length of time that you certainly would catch any possible problem in an investigation you wouldn't have. I believe that the Attorney General's office actually had asked us to make it 60.
Right, I'm talking about the piece where the licensee can petition, so they're gonna come back to us and say, can we throw away the escalator tapes that?
It would be on a one-by-one basis, and you can't just blanket say what you have to or what's not, because
Right.
every property is designed differently. So one entrance to an escalator that actually might lead to a money area, you might want to make them keep. So you'd have to really handle that one by one, which would be part of the surveillance submission that they would review with you.
And just based on the comments, my expectation would be not so much that they'd come after and say, can I throw this stuff away, but that they would come before and say, here are the 50 areas that we're recording. For these 20, is it okay if we just keep them for 7 days instead of 30 in advance?
So you'd look at it kind of as a one-time request, not,
It would be when you're doing
Every
the
2 weeks.
surveillance submission.
Okay.
On the next, or, let's see, well, on page 3 of the printed regs, there's the thing that requires dedicated facial recognition coverage. Is that, apparently that's available? That's a requirement that can be met?
Yeah, it's, we had found in New Jersey, and that's what I'll use as an example, we had a few holdups at the cashier's cage, and there weren't necessarily designated cameras right on the face of the patron that was committing the robbery. We found it invaluable for events that happen later during the course of things, because we had a clear, concise photo of that individual. We could run it through facial recognition
Oh, so you're not
software.
saying, I misunderstood. So
Software,
you're not
it's,
saying facial recognition software, you're just saying
No,
a camera on their face. I got it.
And we
Okay.
say that because
Sorry, got it.
the quality camera makes a difference as
got
to
you.
whether you're able to utilize that picture or
Yes.
not.
it's not like the movies.
It's a higher
where
quality.
Yeah.
They run
Yes.
the face through
And angles.
Interpol when
Right.
something
Yes.
comes up.
I was in the Matrix, I was there for a minute. Others do it.
Yeah, I just had a question on page 4. How did we decide, I know the comments were for, I'm looking at B, number 1. We had 35,000, we went to 50, they asked for 100 or more.
Yeah.
That was a
It's somewhat of an
compromise.
arbitrary number anyway.
Yeah.
35,000 was something that is from the past.
Yeah.
I figure with inflation, 50 would be there, but there aren't an abundance of machines that offer a jackpot of 50,000 or above. We thought it was a fair number to appease
So
the
we'll
comment.
track it.
We also asked for cameras. You know, obviously, it's important to have them in the parking areas, but during our visits to establishments, we noticed that there are cameras that zoom in on license plates coming in and out of the garage. Is that something, obviously, a benefit to the licensee and to us to actually require that kind of license plate?
Well, the
recognition?
license plate, there's actually software that if, let's say, you do have a robbery or something like that, you can identify everybody that came in or out of the garage, get an address, name, and something through registration. It's been useful. I know a few of the properties that I've worked at have that, and it's actually helped them solve quite a few crimes by doing that.
Should we be specific, though, in terms of that actual license plate camera as opposed to just general parking areas of the gaming establishment?
I don't know, maybe I could get Karen's assistant a little bit on this.
I think that we would need to look at the
Pull a mic-
facility, because
pull a
for example,
mic.
you know, MGM's facility, you know, we were just out there last week, you know, their proposed facility very different. Plain Ridge has a one entrance, one exit, so I think we'd work with the, you know, work with the licensee on what makes sense, you know, sort of balancing the, you know, public safety and the interests of the casino against, you know, civil liberties of people that are going in and out, so I think you have to be cognizant of both sides.
I didn't crosswalk all their comments back to the text. So the remote access that, was it Plain Ridge? Yeah, no, Blue Tart I was concerned
I
about.
think both Plain Ridge and MGM
Both, okay,
objected to it.
did you address that?
It's on page 2, that's paragraph 4, and I think Director Wells will...
Yes, I think that one of their comments was regarding the security of and concerns about an additional line, and that's the reason that the language was modified to say that the transmissions have been encrypted to ensure security, so that's to address the concern. From my perspective, I feel strongly that we do want the remote access for law enforcement and for regulatory enforcement purposes. It does make a difference that we have the ability to look at what we're looking at without people in the room knowing that we're looking at it, and that's an advantage that I think is worthwhile. Also, we have, you know, based on the setup we have in Massachusetts, we're not in Atlantic City where there's, you know, our offices are right near all the casinos. The casinos are in different locations, so there's a benefit to the commission if we're working on different investigations having a remote location. I do personally think that it's worthwhile.
But in the places I've seen, the commission room in the casino is a
Yeah.
room separate from
Yep.
the surveillance room, and that room on premises has
Yep.
access.
Right, but
So
yes.
Why wouldn't that serve the purpose?
Because there would be people such as myself or the commanding officer from the state police and other people who may be working on investigations that may not be in Springfield or Everett or in Plainville. That would be the advantage.
Is that used in some places, Bruce?
Not to my knowledge.
So this would be unique to us?
Yes.
I don't know that it's unique.
I say I don't know of
Yeah,
any place else.
I believe
I
that-
have, though, been in conferences where we've seen live feed of other people's casinos floor. It wasn't to like the regulators or anything like that, but I have seen it. Back earlier on, encryption wasn't up to what it used to be today. So I think it's less of an issue now. The military uses encrypted video and everybody else that you can do it encrypted at a level that you don't have to worry about somebody stealing the signal.
Correct. And it's very common in policing now also to
Yes.
have the off-site availability. So I would agree that it's.
Is there a cost implication of this?
It's usually just done over like a T1 line or
It just
something like that.
means, okay, so it's, we would do it on our own line. It doesn't cost the operator anything.
Yes.
But what does it do to this? Don't we have to have a secure facility in our place where you look at this? I mean, when you go into these surveillance rooms, you have to sign in a book and somebody stands by the book all 24
Right.
hours a day?
In the new office space, it would be in the IEB section, which will be locked and have restricted access.
Yeah. The sign-in log, though, serves more of a purpose as to who they're allowing in that
Well,
room.
I know, but it's
Yeah.
an accountability piece.
Yes.
I mean, I'm just, I know we're not going to be sloppy about this, but the accountability piece serves, okay. Can I come back to make one more shot at this nearly dead horse? That's paragraph 2. I finally have found my red. And what about saying that, leaving that as it is, but saying something along the lines of no exclusion can occur without the personal authorization of the head of the IEB or the division? So you got to get some individual, identified individual at the very top to sign off on this before it can happen.
I don't think I would have a problem with that.
Yeah, I would say either
They would,
myself as the director.
something that severe, they would be involved in anyway, hopefully, but I would, you know.
I would say the director or else the commanding officer of the gaming enforcement unit of the state police.
Oh, I thought it was the AG's Division of Gaming Enforcement that we were
Oh,
talking
the
Yeah,
division.
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry,
It's the
pardon me.
division.
So that would be the division director.
The director of the division or the director of the IEB.
Correct.
Well, it does say the commission and the division. So I would think the commission would be
IEB director.
IEB
Right.
and the division. I would just say, if I was not available, I would also defer to, in the present example, Detective Lieutenant Connors, if I was not available to direct that. But the division would be the division Assistant Attorney General Chief. So that presently is Patrick Hanley.
Well, okay, that's fine with me, so long
Okay.
as there is an identifiable individual who has to sign off on this
Yep.
before it happens.
I would be in agreement with that.
Okay. Now the horse is dead.
Tired.
It's tired, it's been tired.
All right, anything else? Where are we now?
Well, if the commission is comfortable with these changes as amended, this document has now been through the entire promulgation process. It's ready for final promulgation, if you're ready to do it now, or whenever it seems appropriate.
I would move that we approve the surveillance of the gaming establishment regulations with the amended change just identified,
And the SBIS, the amended SBIS.
and the amended, I don't think that was amended, though.
It's called the amended.
It's
SBA.
called that.
Oh, it's called the
Yeah.
amended, never mind. Yeah.
Amended from
And
amended from the
amended
first
SBIS.
one months ago.
Second.
Did that cover everything that we needed? There's
No,
something else,
we
isn't
would also ask that you approve the capital investment regulations and the amended SBIS for that to go forward, and the amended SBIS and the regulatory monitoring and inspection reg as well.
Do you want individual motion? We already have
If you
one.
want to do all three at one time, that would be great. But we can do them individually too, that's fine. But there's
Right.
3 separate regulations we'd like to
Right.
move forward.
And 2 or 3 SBISs.
3 SBISs and 3
right.
regulations,
Do you want
yes.
to take that one from the top?
So we weren't going to discuss those, correct? We've already discussed those enough? We're
The other
prepared to
ones,
move
we should be
those?
fine. It's my understanding we did not make changes to the monitoring reg.
So
And
there's
the
not-
capital investment, we haven't made changes to.
Okay, so let me get them all. So I move that we,
It's 7B on the agenda. 7B might help.
I have 7B here. but I
Okay.
have to flip the pages to get all the titles correct. So, okay, so the first amended small business impact statement is 205 CMR 141, surveillance of the gaming establishment. And, yeah, and that to include the surveillance of the gaming establishment regulations with the changes just identified. And then what's the next page number here?
7-1.
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah. And then the amended SBIS and final version of the capital investment, as well as the administrative search and seizure regulations?
Yes.
Okay.
And the amended SBIS for that.
And the SBIS that accompanies that.
Right.
I'll re-second that motion.
Thank you. That's what Steve was trying to tell me to do.
Right, that's,
Sorry.
all right, we have a second. Do we have any other discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Why don't we take a quick break, and then we'll finish up with item number 8.